AM 590, KXSP Omaha's ESPN Radio. It's time for the Metro's only racing talk show. The Front Stretch, presented by Joe's Karting in Council Bluffs. Now, here's Dan Taylor and Buddy Ray.
Good morning, race fans, and welcome to the Front Stretch, presented by Joe's Karting in Council Bluffs, online at joeskarting.com. That's karting with a K. Fast-paced, white-knuckle racing where the only speed restriction is how fast you are. I got to tell you, I can't say it enough how much I enjoy going to a go-kart track where there is no governors on these things. I've joked with you about it before. I think it was the first times I actually made you laugh. I was talking about when I go down to the Ozarks with my family for vacation, and one of the things we always do is go to a go-kart track. And so you hop in the track, they throw the green flag, you hit the gas, and and you go all of about 5.5, 6 miles an hour. But you could do that coming out of the pits at Joe's Karting because there's no governors on these things.
They're pretty fast, but when we see you coming out of the pits, we're like, whoa, it's Dan Taylor.
You guys specially designed the track to keep the speeds down. Realistically, you go about 40, 45.
Track record right now stands, and I get asked this every day at work. Track record, 14-time national go-kart champion, Jordan Krug. For those that wanted to know, we don't normally tell you that, but Jordan Krug does have the track record at 52 mile an hour. Now that's not what you're normally going to do. No.
Is that an oval, or is that your road course?
That's the road course. Okay. If you've been over there lately. If you've never been over there, you're going to be doing right around 35 to 38 mile an hour. But when he was doing 52 mile an hour, we're talking like 14.0, 14.1 second lap times. When you take to the track,
let's not even get to that.
We're talking father time.
We need to talk about that. We're talking Sunset Speedway tonight because this is hour number 2 of the walk down Sunset Lane, and we are going to be talking about the Kelly era. The later years of Sunset Speedway, about, what do you say, Craig Kelly, about 70 was, when you guys took over what year?
1976.
So it was about 76 That's
the spirit, 76, yeah.
And sitting off to my side here is apparently a man who, have you had anything thrown at you tonight?
No, I haven't been hit.
Now's your chance.
Have you been
threatened? No, because you might hit me. Don't throw anything, wait until afterwards. Apparently one of the meanest SOBs to ever grace a pit or a flag stand. I've heard so many stories about how mean you are.
That's my introduction? Come on.
To ever put on a pair of race director headphones.
There we go. But to his credit, ran a very tight ship and a ship that was very successful, something that frankly a lot of tracks are having issue with today. And do you have a consulting fee maybe you could talk to people about? Go out and help them run their tracks, or?
I'm always available. No charge.
That's the voice of Craig Kelly. He was the promoter, and official for Sunset Speedway for the later years, the Kelly era. We got a lot lined up for you guys this hour as we take another walk down Sunset Lane. Turn number 1, we're going to talk about the change of an era. Your family purchasing the track, the changes you guys made to it, the modifications, and then some of the contributions you made to dirt track to benefit dirt track and to make it cheaper for some of the drivers, to keep it even, to keep it interesting. Turns 2 and 3, we're going to have so many drivers that are going to come up here and talk between the turns. We've got Dave Chase, Joe Koziski, Steve Koziski, John Kinney Jr., Leon Zeitner, Tom Grasso, and Stan Caesar are back up here as former announcers. We got a lot of people we're going to get to. And then in turn 4, we're going to turn it over to the fans and ask questions as we continue our walk down Sunset Lane. And again, Stan, excuse me, I'm so scatterbrained tonight. I'm getting all screwed up. Craig, I got to say another personal thank you. You've been nothing but absolutely helpful with meeting with me. I don't know how many times we had lunch talking about how this is all going to work and what we're going to expect. So thank you for all of your help. I appreciate you helping me out with this.
Well, it's great to get everybody back together. It's been 13 years since we closed, and I enjoy seeing everybody, and I hope everybody's having a great time.
I want to say thank you to Stan Caesar again for helping me out. Lee Ackerman for helping us out. Koziski Auto Parts for sponsoring the Legends of the Dirt Series. And by the way, guys, a quick plug. If you guys haven't been listening to the Front Stretch on AM 590, Omaha's ESPN Radio on Sunday mornings, you really are missing out on some of the most legendary dirt drivers that we've been interviewing over the last couple of months. Buddy, help me out on some of these names. I'm going to draw a blank because I'm trying to pull it off the top of my head, but we've talked to
Ed Sanger.
Ed Sanger, the Iowa Traveler, and we've talked with
Ernie Durr, I believe.
No, not Ernie Durr. Gosh, I'm drawing
Webb.
Gary Webb we've
Webb.
talked to. Kenny Schrader we've talked to. Coming up in a couple of
Jet,
weeks.
Johnny Sadoff.
The Jet, yep. We're going to talk with the king of sprint cars. We're going to be talking with Steve Kinzer. As we wrap up the Legends of the Dirt series, we're also working on getting Jeff Purvis to come on and wrap up the final weekend of the Legends of the Dirt series. And all of that is because of Kaziski Auto Parts and sponsorship. And thank you to Joe's Karting again for being the title sponsor of the front stretch and making sure that we can afford to put the radio show on each and every weekend. Now that the sponsors are out of the way, and I've taken up 6 minutes of our time already, let's take another walk down Sunset Lane. Craig, your family purchased the track at Daytona Speed Weeks in '76?
Correct.
So talk about that a little bit. Your dad came home from Daytona and said, we own a track now.
Yeah, my mother was thrilled. And we owned a racetrack, and I was a freshman in high school, and the place was in good shape. The previous ownership had done a great job, and so we had a good facility to take over, and we dove in, and that was an interesting time for racing because the coupes were transitioning still into the late models, and once we got by the late 70s, we had the late models in effect and the coupes gone, and the limited late models in. So the late 70s was a transition era for short track racing from the coupe era into the late model era.
When you talk about your mom was not really excited about that, talk about, weren't you telling me at lunch how she tried to tell your dad to get his money back on the track and return it?
You don't know my father very well. But it was a surprise, and we owned the track, and I was very excited about it because I was 15 years old and I didn't have any financial stake in the deal, so it was great for me. It was good for getting the girls, when you owned a racetrack, so that was great.
Talk about taking over the track, and was there a year of just kind of letting things happen and seeing how they worked, or did you guys jump in right away and make some changes?
No, the first year we pretty much kept the old officials and the old rules and just got our feet wet, and then over the course of 77, 78, and 79, we transitioned a lot of the officials from the previous owners out and started bringing in our own people.
And talk just a little bit, a couple of years after you guys took the track, get your involvement with the NASCAR Weekly Racing Series and what that brought to the table.
We brought NASCAR in 1984. In its second year in existence, we were the 9th or 10th NASCAR Weekly Racing Series track, and that was a really cool program that NASCAR figured that they wanted to vertically market and take over the racetracks on the entry level of racing and bring them into the fold. And so we were one of the early tracks in the NASCAR Weekly Racing Series, and there was some other great tracks in the region that came on shortly thereafter. Adams County, Eagle Raceway, and then all the tracks across Iowa. There was 10 tracks in our region, and from 1984 until 1991, the 10 tracks in the NASCAR Central region was probably some of the best short track racing in the United States.
Some of the toughest competition too.
Yep. Yes.
And NASCAR kind of brought a sense of corporate into short track racing a little bit, and a little more professionalism maybe than what was taking place in the previous years?
Oh, very much so. I mean, we had some great local sponsors that have been with us forever. The Maxi Walkers and the Godfathers and a lot of the local companies, but cool, NASCAR opened the doors to bring in a lot of national sponsors and sponsorship dollars through the parts stores and the like.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the competition being what it is, some of our guys right here hit the ground running in that aspect, and we're right at the top of the regional standings since the get-go, and it's still going on today.
Yeah, we had, I think Joe was our national champ from our track as his home track in 1986, and we had many, many regional champions out of Sunset Speedway in the 80s and 90s as well.
Yeah, people around the country knew about Sunset Speedway.
Oh yes, I mean there was only about six or seven tracks out of the 100 in the weekly racing series that were Sunday night racetracks. So Sunset Speedway was very well known.
Was it a no-brainer to switch to NASCAR, or was there a lot of thought that went into it?
The NASCAR sanction came with its ties and things that they wanted you to do and things that they made you to do, and there was some initial hesitation about the financial outlay, but we decided to do it, and it was a great thing for us.
Tom, Stan, you guys got any questions?
Dan, this is really cool. First of all, I got to tell you, are we doing this again next year?
Yeah. You guys want to do it next year?
I mean, look at the people here. You got Bill Rick, Bob Kaziski. You got, look at the hair on this guy over here. The Manders are in the house. The guy will never go bald. You got Billy Layton over here. I knew him before he was Bill Layton. It was Billy Layton. He's just a little guy. Keith Lightoff. I remember you guys were talking earlier about sitting up in the grandstands. My first trip was in about 1958. And these guys were young guys. And they were out there racing in those coupes. Well, they were.
We were all young back in those days, Tom.
And my dad would take all the neighborhood kids out there, and we're sitting on the grandstands eating popcorn watching these guys. So a very cool deal. Glenn Roby, I mean, man alive. First A-feature winner ever, right?
Yeah.
At Sunset Speedway.
Well, we're glad we can get all these guys together in one room. This is cool. This is really cool.
You did a good job.
Well, thank you very much. I can sleep now, finally. Craig, talk about your transition into just being that 15-year-old kid that had no stake in the track to all of it. There was obviously years that passed by, but then you became part owner in it. You became the official, and you really started to kind of take over and implement rules that we still see today.
Well, I decided early on that I wanted to go the race official route, and I went and trained to be a race scorer and then transitioned from there into the race director. And one of my big focuses, with a lot of great advice from the Jim Wilsons of the region and Al Frieden that had the NASCAR tracks on the other side of the region, was to try and cut costs in racing. And we put a lot of things in for the racers in the 80s and 90s that probably initially had some resistance. Weight rules, carb rules, tire rules, engine rules that were designed to cut the cost of racing somewhat and get more cars to the racetrack so that we had better fields. And we tried to be a leader in those types of areas. And then when we had a lot of race cars on a Sunday night, then we had to focus on running a razor fast race show so we could get people home so they could go to work on Monday.
Now, obviously I joked about it with you earlier, but what made it that people always talked about you're such a hard official? You know, you ran a tight ship. Do you think maybe there was times you ran too tight of a ship, or did it all even out? I'm not going to ask the drivers that question because I know that answer from the drivers.
I was a big believer in that if a guy wrecked his race car and couldn't afford to bring it back to the racetrack, that not only cost us a bunch of money in the pits, but it deprived the fans of race cars. So there's a lot of the old timers here that would say that we called an extremely tight race show, and we didn't let people come off the bottom and shut off people at the wall or shove people up in the corners to gain a position. And that was kind of a new phenomenon back in the 80s and 90s. And so we called things very tight, and we upset some people, but I like to think that we called it consistently across the field.
The old saying, rubbin's racing, were you guys trying to, did you still let some rubbing going on, but call some of it that you could maybe say, well, that could have determined the end of the race?
Well, all the guys sitting here will remember my pit meetings when I said, if rubbin changes position, it's not racing.
Is that agreed, anybody?
My officials are back there clapping. But
we can probably get into that a little later on when those drivers get up here.
Yeah, they'll be up here talking about what they think of that later.
Are you nervous sitting in front of the Craigie cooler right now?
You know, I already got sprayed by a fire extinguisher once by Luke Cochran. So if it's the second time tonight, as long as somebody has a towel, we'll be okay.
Don't be alarmed unless somebody's filled it. Since it's got here, it's still empty.
Yeah. We made sure it was empty before it arrived.
I want to take that thing home with me and put it in my office.
Craig, when you were...
Luke, can I have that
Luke
fire extinguisher, please?
Luke, Craig wants that fire extinguisher.
Can I take that and put it in my office?
Absolutely.
There we go. I got a souvenir.
There you go.
Now, didn't... He asked if he could take it to the bathroom and fill it up.
You're going to trust him to fill that up?
We'll get that story later on from Luke. Exactly
continued.
What's going on with that. So we'll talk to Luke later on in the show. Let's continue with Craig Kelly, the Kelly era, as we're talking about it, the later years. Even though it wasn't that later, it lasted quite a span.
Craig, in today's world, a lot of the promoters are having a hard time getting card counts and crowd counts and whatnot. How easy was Sunset back in the 80s to run, or did you still have the same struggles that today's promoters had, or still have?
Oh, I think a racetrack was probably easier to run back in that era because there wasn't so many other things for people to do. The location of the racetrack was very close geographically to the city, and there just wasn't 16 movie plexes and video games and all the things that to distract the kids. The kids wanted to go racing with their parents and their families, and it was probably easier to run a racetrack back then than it is now. I think marketing a racetrack now is, with 180 cable channels, is a heck of a lot different than advertising a track back in the 80s and 90s.
And speaking of that, you were one of the first tracks, I remember you telling me at lunch the other day that you were one of the first tracks that really began to market the track and really promote it as an event to be, a place to be on Sunday nights.
That's true. We rode the NASCAR popularity of the late 80s and early 90s and did a lot of marketing and promotion through our sponsors and their employees and everybody else, and it worked really well for us. And once again, there was, at that time there was 30 channels, and it was a lot easier to reach the masses than it is now.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of those promotional deals with some of your great sponsors. How many people out there remember Shopco Night? Huh?
Bike night.
How about the Max I Walker Kids Money Grab?
The money grab. Yeah. Legendary stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean those were things that I think some of the fans and obviously the families and the kids remembered just as much as the racing that was going on out there.
The bikini contest.
Wow, yeah. How many remember the bikini contest? In today's politically correct world, that never happens anymore.
The demolition derbies where I nearly died.
Oh, yeah.
Joe Kaczynski, can we get the bikini contest to come back at I-80 Speedway?
It's not.
Please?
It's not PC anymore.
Bob's over there laughing and smiling.
Grace said no.
Come on, Grace. I think we got overruled.
I would just remember I was sitting over there with Craig's mom a little bit earlier, and we were talking about the fans. And you go back to that, and we're at Eagle now, Stan and I. And when we were at Sunset, you could get there early enough in the evening, even before hot laps. And you look out in the grandstand area, and to this day it goes on at Eagle. But at Sunset, you see the same people.
In the same seats.
In the same seats, in the same area of that grandstand.
Yeah.
Rooting for whoever their favorite driver was or is out there. And the other thing I mentioned was it was really something. You had a lot of folks from North Omaha. You had a lot of folks from South Omaha. And you had folks from Council Bluffs, of course. But for whatever reason, the folks from South Omaha sat on the south side of the tunnel, and the folks from North Omaha sat on the north side of the tunnel, and I don't know why. Nothing was planned, but that's the way it was. I mean, it's just stuff like that you notice, and you remember.
And even before we had assigned pit pads, everybody parked in the same spot. And you could ride around on the four-wheeler and see the same crews in the same parking spots every week and tell them hi and good luck. And then you put on the headsets and got ready to go.
I'll tell you one other thing about the fans at Sunset anyway I noticed. And again, the Mander table over here. I remember when Keith Jr. was married, and I remember when his younger wife was there at the time, and then they had a daughter. And I remember when she was carrying the daughter. And I remember when she was born, and then it's like generational. You see these folks that they grow up there. And I mean, it's amazing. And a senior in college now, and I remember when she was, when she was a baby. Mm-hmm. But it's just stuff like that that's, I don't know how you replace that. Yeah. I don't know how you put a tradition on something like that and open up a new racetrack and immediately that happens. It doesn't happen. You have to do that from the get-go.
What set, in your eyes, Craig, what set Sunset aside to make sure that everyone made it a point to be at Sunset Speedway on Sunday nights? What
only place to be on Sunday nights.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
The location, the competition, all the best raced maybe at other racetracks on Friday night and other racetracks on Saturday night, but everybody, all the top dogs, competed at Sunset on Sunday night to try and win the track title.
Yeah. Well, Stan, should we take a break and get some of the drivers up here?
Sounds great.
All right, we'll be right back here on the front stretch, presented by Joe's Karting on AM 590, Omaha's ESPN Radio.
We're working the high line into turn 2 on the front stretch, presented by Joe's Karting, online at joeskarting.com.
Welcome back to the front stretch. We are heading into turn number 2, presented by Kaziski Auto Parts, online at KaziskiAutoParts.com. Premium recycled parts at an affordable price. Kaziski Auto Parts is where you can go and get your alternator, your radiator, your U-joints, your whatever you need to get replaced for your car, and they're fully warranted when you purchase your stuff from Kaziski Auto Parts. The great thing I like about it is that I'm not the biggest gearhead around. So I can walk into Kaziski Auto Parts, I can go find Andrew or one of their fine representatives and just say, this is what year I've got, this is my make and model, get me a part. And they will actually go out to the junkyard, not a junkyard, to the salvage yard. And
junkyard?
I got yelled at one time already. And they will, I didn't say that, Joe, that was Buddy. Buddy said that. And they'll go find the part for you.
They'll hook you up.
I don't think you really want to go to, what's that other radio station, 590 or something
hey now. Like
that.
There's an edit there.
All right, we're doing the walk down Sunset Lane, and we are walking into turn number 2, which is going to be our driver section. And on the panel now, we've got Leon Zeitner, Dave Chase, Joe Kaziski, and Steve Kaziski. And then also Craig Kelly still sitting here with us. We're going to talk some stories. And we've got the 2 announcers from Sunset Speedway, Tom Grasso and Stan Caesar. And let's just get right into it, boys. Stan, I'm going to hand it over to you, and let's get going.
Well, let's talk about moving up into the late model era and starting back in, I believe, about 1974-75 when the torch kind of got passed on a little bit. The Kaziski family, Joe and Steve, both moved up into that late model division. Talk just a little bit about the early years when you guys first started out at Sunset and how it was racing for Craig Kelly as a race director.
First off, 74 and 5 never existed for me, so I can't answer you on that part. I started 78, and I actually had the hobby class that they had at that time, 78 and 9. My first year of late model racing was 1980.
Okay. Seems like it was earlier than that.
Well, I don't need to be any older. I was just telling Leon how much older he was than I am. So, it's hard to go. What?
You're older than me.
You're older than me, I believe.
Anyway, we'll just keep going there.
Joe, what was the start of it all like for you?
Actually, it was 76 was my first full season that I run there, and had a pretty good year at that time. I think Stan was driving the car a little bit, or owned a race car at that time. Yep. So he was owning a race car, and we was competing a little bit, and later on he started helping me out a little bit.
My claim to fame was I beat Joe Kaziski in a heat race one time.
That's all it takes.
And when he won the national championship, I never let him forget that.
He still tells me today, I beat you once.
Beat you once. Yeah.
I think Joe was ill that night.
Oh. But talk about just about everybody up here on the panel. I know Dave's family was involved in the automotive business, and he came up from. You raced motorcycles originally, didn't you, Dave?
No, I tried, but I didn't heal up well, so I got off them things. Stuck with cars.
Got off the motorcycles into cars, and of course Leon, second generation. Your dad raced. You guys resided up in South Dakota and raced up there.
Yeah, he raced a lot up at Casino Speedway up in Watertown, and then Huset's, and then there was a speedway in Brookings in the town where we live.
I remember you guys first came to town one by one. You and all the brothers got cars. I believe that's when you still had the sportsman division. In that first year, the late model set out, I believe, 1 year, and then came back under the NASCAR sanction. Talk just a little bit about your first experience at Sunset Speedway.
What was your first year?
My first year, I believe, was 1982, and that might have been around the time when they were changing, or the late models were striking, and the sportsman cars were there. And it was my first year, and I remember there were some guys that came in, some guys that didn't. A lot of guys hated Craig at that time.
Yep, they did. 1982 was one of the best years of my life.
Al Drusdo and Dick Bradley stayed away, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that was a long year.
Yeah, there was flyers and everything out and surveys and don't go here and don't go there. And I remember them days. It was kind of, I'm going, what am I getting myself into?
But did you show up? I'll buy you a beer.
Well, I'll have another one.
There was really flyers out telling people not to go to Sunset?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
There was a strike in '83 and after the '82 season strike, and that was a time we don't really need to talk about tonight.
Okay. Because we're going down the good parts.
Yes.
We're talking about the good stuff.
This is a stroll down Sunset memory lane, not bad memory lane.
He can complain about his memory lane at that time. I remember it really changed the era and gave him the opportunity to become NASCAR and become one of the powerhouses and what really happened. So, yes, sometimes out of the bad you find the good, and I think there was a lot of good for the longevity.
Exactly, taking one step backwards to take two steps forward.
Correct. That did happen.
Yeah.
'83 was a tough year, and '84 was the first year in NASCAR, so it led to great things.
Yeah.
I got a question for Steve and Joe. It's something I always kind of wondered about. Where you come out of a racing family, obviously your dad was super successful. You have two, I would say, distinctively different driving styles between the two of you guys.
We both use a steering wheel. We both use a gas pedal.
Yeah, okay.
We can't be too far off.
Tom, what was different about their driving style?
I want to see what they say first,
Okay.
and I'll tell you what I think. But.
Yeah.
And what I think doesn't matter, but that's why I'm asking you, how much advice did you really get from your dad, either one of you, or did you get any? Or how did you come up with, the way you drove compared to your brother, either one?
We got all good advice, and if you don't believe us, ask him. And if we done wrong, he made sure we knew what we was doing wrong.
You were telling us last year on the round table that when you had a bad year, he was always the first one in your window if you had a bad race.
First one in the window net that would tell you what you done wrong, absolutely.
Steve?
Oh, yeah. I had Dad for several years at the beginning, and then I had Wayne. And you want to talk about a stronger critic than Dad? Was Wayne Mason. If anybody remembers Wayne, I'm sure many do. But, yeah, I had a lot of criticism along the way, and each one of us did have a different driving style, yes, and it's what we felt in the race car. And, yeah, we jumped into each other's cars and hot-lapped each other's cars, so you felt something different. I don't know what it was, but it was.
We've seen, between me and Stan, we've seen a million laps of different guys and their styles and stuff, and that's what I'd just say Steve was, in my mind, was just smooth.
Smooth.
Very smooth.
One word. Steve was smooth.
And Joe was more of a guy that would just muscle the car around. I mean, he'd get it around the track and make it do things. And it was not that either one's good or bad. It was just a different style. And that's why I was just kind of curious if when you come in, if your dad would say something like, why don't you drive something, Steve, why aren't you driving like Joe in that corner, or vice versa? Do you ever got that?
Well, I know for me, I was criticized on different deals you would try to change the car for, because Wayne was phenomenal for changing race cars. If anybody knew we could set fast time in a race, and we came in and changed 4 springs and maybe a couple shocks and stagger while we're at it. But in return, he had to adjust things for me, and then he started realizing I can't make the car go. I've got to adjust to my style, and that's when we really started excelling more to learn what we were doing with each other on the cars.
And I think one of the biggest things, and I can say this about both of you probably, is the ability to stay out of accidents that are happening up in front of you. You know, and when you guys were racing for championships, Dave, the same way, and Leon, I know when you, not to be involved, when you're looking at those points, not to be involved in those accidents and being able to drive far enough ahead of the car, I think that's something that a lot of guys today could take some lessons from you guys sitting up here right now.
Well, one thing we was always told is, first to win a race, you have to finish the race. Mm-hmm. So it didn't do a lot of good to tear the car up and not finish the race.
All 4 of these guys, I race directed for 20 years. These 4 guys sitting up here were as good at preserving a race car over the course of the season as anybody.
Yep. Is that something you can learn, is how to preserve a car and how to stay out of a wreck? Or is that something that is it luck of the draw? Is that just, I got lucky on that one?
Well, there's some luck involved, but there's a group of drivers that are what I call points racers that run up front and don't tear their stuff up, and there's a lot of guys that win a few a year and then they DNF about 5 or 6 more besides that. So,
Steve, you were going to say something?
Well, I see a lot of racers today, and I walk up and visit with them and say, if you want to win championships, you got to back off a little bit. Every lap is not going to be the checkered flag, and it's happening all the time. I raced against a great modified racer named Mark Noble out of Minnesota. And in '99, I told Charlie Clark, I said, he's going to win more battles, but we're going to win the war. And Charlie looked at me, and we won the track title by 3 nights. But Mark won 7 features, I won 5. Uh-huh. And that was the difference. Mark Noble drove the wheels off a race car, but didn't know how to win championships.
Kelly Bone stuff.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, you get tired of fixing that stuff, and you'll learn that, you know, it's better to take a car home and work on it and come back next week.
I'll tell you how small a world it is. I go bass fishing with Mark Noble every summer up in Minnesota. We go bass fishing together, but I got one question that I'd like to have each guy answer, I guess, is out of all the guys you ever raced against, whether locally or otherwise, who's the toughest one you ever raced? Or the one you would hate to race the most?
Let's start with Leon. What do you think?
Who was the hardest guy to pass?
The hardest guy to pass. I can probably remember this at Sunset Speedway years ago, and this is when Glenn was still racing. And I was a young punk. Glenn was running hard, and I don't know if he remembers this, but they had mirrors in the car. And I can still remember this coming out of turn 2, and they had the bank on Sunset Speedway up there. You get up on that bank and go. And every time we look up, I see Glenn looking at that mirror. And Glenn was getting towards the end of his career probably when I started. Not really. Just, 2 weeks ago, I think he quit. But he was looking at that mirror, and I knew when he was going to look at that mirror, and I swerved out and went up on the bank, and I passed him. And somebody goes, Glenn was going to win that race. I go, I come out here to win that race tonight. It's just probably one of the second or third features I ever won in my life.
Was he a hard guy to pass, though? It took, you had to take advantage of him looking in the mirror in order to get around him?
Yeah, I mean, back in the days, they had, when I first started, cars had mirrors in them. And I remember racing with Gary Zidane had mirrors. And you take some of them old timers that had mirrors. I never raced with a mirror. But I had enough time going forward, not looking who's behind me.
Yeah.
But them guys who had them mirrors knew how to use them.
Dave?
Yeah, Dave, what about you? Dave Chase.
Toughest
guy
ever
a lot of
passed.
guys that, you look at them, they're hard to pass. It depends on which era you were in. But early in my career, I think probably Bill Rick probably was one of the toughest guys. He was a great competitor. And it seemed like when you got to them guys, you wanted to race them a little harder. And so sometimes you created your own problems trying to race them too hard. But as time went on, of course, there was Bob Koziski, a great racer, and you wanted to beat these guys because they were the stars then, and I was up and coming, and I wanted to beat them real bad. And then came his boys and stuff. So there's a competitive edge there that I think sometimes they had, and maybe they didn't. But I didn't let that work on me. We had less experience, and with some of the guys, and that would give me the edge as I wanted to beat the experience.
Joe?
Well, I'm going to tell you, if you listen to the Legends radio station every Sunday, you'll find out all of them.
All those guys?
Over the last 2 years, yeah. All the guys that's been up this table. I mean, seriously, I don't know how you could pick out one person that was probably the hardest to pass or hardest to beat, because, like Dave said, it was kind of the era, and if it was at their time. And that's what made more of it than anything. I mean, you know, you could see, like he said, when Bill or my dad started getting older, it slowed up a little bit. When we started getting older, we slowed up for the guys that were coming up behind us. And, you know, it just kind of falls into that type of a deal. So,
who is your biggest rival? And I know the answer. So
I would have to say Kyle Burke was one of the biggest. You know, through the Sunset days, let's put it that way, probably Kyle Burke.
Yeah.
You know, we had a lot of rivals depending on where we was racing at. You know, if I go down to Kansas City, I could pick out different rivals.
Right.
I'd go to Park Jefferson, and there was different guys. So you just kind of pick it up. But means we're talking about Sunset Speedway. Kyle Burke was one of the biggest. Dave was always good. You know, I mean, like I said, about everybody there. My brothers, I had as much problem with them as anybody we raced against.
Whoever was in front of you.
There you go. That's it.
You talk about rivalries. It seems like, and it might have been perception, but when you came out to Sunset Speedway on Sunday night, you had a few factions, a few groups. It was like the Kaziskis against Dave Chase, or the Kaziskis against the Zeitners, or the Kaziskis against Kyle Burke. You know. And you know, it was one of those deals to where and each group had their own cheering section full of fans that were very passionate about their favorite driver, and it was just part of the Sunset Speedway experience, you know.
I truthfully believe it was more what the fans made of it than what it was
what
the drivers made of it.
Exactly.
You know, the fans made all the tradition of Sunset Speedway really by who they voted for and how they kept it up through the year. I mean, it was a great rivalry between everybody, and we'd all sit here and have a beer like we do now.
And that the same thing happened when we talked to the guys earlier, you know, between Bill and Glenn and your dad, you know, the rivalries that were going on with Jim Wyman and Bill and stuff like that, and Bud Burdick and your dad. When the races were over, everybody had a beer or everybody was in the Sunset Inn after the races, watching the replay and eating chicken.
Dave, did you have a rival that you just couldn't seem to not be around and get connected with and constantly just battling with? Is there one person or maybe a couple of guys?
Oh, no, not really. Early in the years at Sunset, I didn't race there every Sunday night. I kind of moved around and stuff, and I think probably the biggest rival I ever had, and actually we were good friends, and probably the best friends today is Jim Wyman. Mm-hmm. You know, him and I raced hard together at Harlan. It was Ford versus Chevrolet, and the fans took that to heart, and the fans got so involved with Ford versus Chevrolet, it got really serious some nights, and where the fist fights and the stuff in the stands, and it really, I remember one night they wouldn't let the flagman go home, they wouldn't let him out of the stands, they were going to whip him because they give Jim Wyman an advantage. And but Jim and I were good friends, but probably the most serious competitors against each other. I wouldn't call us rivalries.
Yeah, that was a great era.
Craig, did you ever give Jim Wyman an advantage?
Jim Wyman was winding down when I started race directing, but he drove along the lines of Steve. He was a very smooth, carry your momentum through the corners racer, and the thing I always admired about him was he had the cleanest car, the cleanest pit crew, the cleanest trailer.
Yeah,
he was a class act, and the Ford versus Chevy deal that he brought to the Speedway after he retired was really never replicated until the Wymans came back and brought the Ford rivalry with Chevy back, and when his sons came back with their race cars, probably 10, 15 years later, it brought the Ford rivalry back. We kind of lost that for a while.
Mm-hmm. And Jim wanted to be here tonight, but he decided being in Arizona was a much better idea. I don't know what he's thinking.
You ever drove in a rental car with Jim Wyman? There's nothing smooth about that. That's a long story.
Well, let's hear it. He's not here to rebuke anything. So.
No, just a short story. Going out to Vegas in a race. And if you ever been out to Vegas, go to race. Jim Wyman driving a rental car. taught me how to get to the Vegas racetrack. There is a deal called out there called the bus lane / Jim Wyman lane. Just get in there and go.
You talk about the rivalries. Having spent some time in the pit area before I joined Tom up in the announcing booth out there, as they were saying, some of the rivalries I think were bigger in the pits between some of the crew members, like Dave's crew and Steve's crew and Joe's crew and the Zeitner guys. The rivalries were as much in the pit area as they were on the track, I think.
They kept putting chicken bones on my car seat.
Now, why would they do that?
You know why. I don't think anybody here doesn't know why, but Mr. Leon, he would.
But that was that great roasted chicken that Doreen had. Now, how could you not go to Sunset Speedway and not have the roasted chicken that Doreen made?
I'll tell you how bad luck that chicken was. One day we was driving to Cedar Rapids, and I had one of the Cavaliers with me, and he went into Burger King in Des Moines and got some chicken tenders, and he asked him in the truck, "Hey, does anybody want any chicken tenders?" And my mom just went like this without looking and grabbed them out of his hand and threw them out the window. He says, "Why'd you do that?" She says, "They're bad luck. I was in hot laps and backed the car in the wall that night, come back home without ever running a race."
Huh.
No chicken till after the races.
There you go.
Talk about that, Joe. You and I were laughing about that, and I'd gotten a message from Allison, the granddaughter of Dave Chase, about the joking that went on between you two guys as you were battling for wins. That they would always take the chicken bones and toss them underneath your trailer or toss them underneath your car, like you said. Toss them. Was there bad juice? I mean, when they did that, was there anything you did to exercise the demons?
A couple times, a couple of my pit guys were great guys, and I could talk them into taking the chicken bones out of the seat and go sit in the grandstand, and they would do it for the night.
Did you ever do anything to get them back?
No, I'd just try to win the race. That would be the best thing to try to get back.
Dave, did he do anything to prank you superstitiously?
No, I don't think so. It was a lot of fun. I mean, the pit crew, they got more out of it than I did. They just thought it was funny, and more humor in it than anything.
Any other stories you guys have like that? Leon, is there anything you got like that with some of the tomfoolery that went on in the pits?
Are you talking?
Don't ask
during the races or after the races?
I'm talking about a story that the FCC won't pull my license.
We're okay right now.
One of my favorite stories is the night that Leon and his brother Mel had a little on-track troubles, and I was unable to contain them in the pit area post-race. Let's hear about that, Leon.
We had a disagreement. I think Speedy broke it up the first time. Speedy broke it up the second time, and Mom was there before anything happened again.
we could not get the fight under control. It was legendary.
Isn't it amazing though, Craig, that rivalry maybe between Leon and Mel has been passed on into the next generation of Zeitners that are racing late models now.
These kids just, well, Joe vouched for this. I mean, I can sit here and you look back at Sunset Speedway, and I remember when I met my wife there. I don't know how many other people met their wife there, but you look at all these kids.
Did you say how many other people
met
your wife there? Is
That's what I thought he said.
How many other individuals met their wives there? I think that's politically correct. But you look back and you see Joe's kids.
In trouble.
Joe's kids are the same age as my kids now. And I don't know, I'm sure Joe remembers this when all the little flashing light shoes and the races were over, and it just looked like you was at a discotheque. All these kids coming down from the pits, walking around with these little light-up shoes, because everybody had to have them.
Yep.
Hey, they were pretty cool.
Now you're out there, as an older guy, racing against these turds, going, I remember when you wasn't even born.
Well, how about we take a quick break? We'll regroup a little bit. We'll get some more guys up here on the microphone because that's what we need is more people on these microphones. And we'll continue this walk down Sunset Lane. Presented by Joe's Karting in Council Bluffs. This is the Front Stretch on AM 590, Omaha's ESPN Radio.
Time to grab another tear-off and make your move. We're headed into Turn 3 on the Front Stretch, presented by Joe's Karting.
We are back here at Quaker Steak and Lube for the Front Stretch, presented by Joe's Karting in Council Bluffs. This is the walk down Sunset Lane. We've changed out the panels. We've gotten a couple of new guys up here. Wayne Q's gesturing and throwing his arms around, telling stories. Wayne, by the way, Wayne, thank you, buddy, by the way. Wayne has been promoting this thing like you wouldn't believe. He's been great. Thank you so much to Wayne. Thank you to Lee Ackerman for getting me all the information and writing a story on it on Fuse Weekly. We appreciate that to Wayne. Where's Luke Cochran? You got to get up here. Get up here, bud. We got to get Luke up here. We got so many guys to get to. I'll quit jib-jabbing. And Stan, talk about some of the guys we got up here. We got a Pro-Am driver all of a sudden.
We got a guy up here that he kind of, right down in the end, he kind of grew up out at Sunset Speedway, started out in the old Pro-Am division. Became a dominant force in the Pro-Am division, then moved up into the Grand National division, became a dominant guy in the Grand National division, then moved up into the late model division. That's John Kinney Jr. Dave Chase still up on the panel with us. Howard Koziel, who raced for quite a number of years, went all the way from Playland Speedway out to Sunset Speedway. We talked about your first A-feature win out there, and he was one of the Ford guys. And then clear down at the end of the table, we got the Sunset Outlaw, Luke J. Cochran.
And Luke's got a present he's going to be giving away later. He's got a good story he's going to tell, too. We got to find out about this fire extinguisher. But first off, you want to talk to John Kinney first?
Let's talk to John Kinney Jr. and Craig Kelly. They instituted the Pro-Am division. And this guy came out in the Pro-Am division. And pretty soon, John Kinney was the guy to beat. And not only did John Kinney race his car, and he was a tough driving the car, they built cars. Pretty soon they got in the chassis building business, and if you didn't have a canine chassis car, you didn't probably have a chance to win in the Pro-Am division. John, talk just a little bit about how you got started in the deal and getting into building the cars and some of the things you guys did to maybe give yourself a little bit, now that you're out of the deal, a little bit of an unfair advantage to the rest of the Pro-Am guys back in the day.
Well, Stan, it basically started off building cars, our own cars, was about money. Racing's always cost quite a bit of money. And I think our first few cars that we had, obviously we paid somebody to put a roll cage in. And it just evolved over time because of money. Okay, we could afford to buy the motor, we could afford to do this, we could afford to do that. But then it left something out. So then we started building the chassis. And then after things kind of got going, we think, well, gosh, if we did this and we did that.
Everybody had good engines. There was a lot of good drivers out there. Everybody was on the same tire. Then you start looking for a way to become more competitive.
We did, and back in the day, we basically, all the cars, and I remember one of the first dominant Katowski cars. I don't know the year, it was like a 67, 68 Camaro, somewhere around there, and it was really, really heavy car, but they were the dominant force at that time. So I got with a guy that used to actually work with them. We got to be buddies, Alan Clark, and we decided, I told him, I says, these cars are all big and heavy, but you can't scale them out as good if we made them lighter. So then all of a sudden we started taking away this and taking away that and making it lighter. Next thing we had a car that we could scale out at 3,100 pounds, race ready. And most all the other cars barely could scale out at 3,400 pounds. And that's the direction we went. And everybody said, oh, that thing will fold up and blow away. I said, well, if you don't crash it, it won't.
Well, you talk about cars that are going to fold up, blow away. Go back years even before that. I can remember, he's standing right over here, Billy Layton, that turned into Bill Layton. That's the father of Bill Layton Jr. He was driving a car for Bob Hatterman. They brought it had a big block Chevy in it. It was a 70 Camaro and no subframe connectors. It was a unibody car. and everybody said that thing's a beer can. It's going to be a throwaway. I'll tell you what, Bill, you did awful good with that car, and it was pretty lightweight, and it was kind of maybe years ahead of its time with a big block in there with a much lighter weight car. Talk about some of the suspension refinements that you guys used to do on the car a little bit, a little tweak in here, a little tweak in there to get a little better front end geometry.
Well, we used to do a little frame pulling, and this was after once you found out that you couldn't cut the A-frame pillar off and refasten it, which people still did, or bent them, tweaked them. So what we did is basically got on the frame machine and actually pulled all the right side suspension forward, which would give you all it did is help you get your alignment. That was the key thing. It would give you your caster that you wanted and still gain your camber. So therefore, it would turn the corner better.
And still be within the rules.
And still be in the rules, because none of the main suspension stuff was ever cut off or moved.
And then, so how many years after getting into, you guys finally started building those cars for customer cars?
Along the way, we still build a car here and there for friends. We'll say people that were in our group, our clique. I don't know what you want to call it. Mm-hmm. But then it just got to a point where we knew we were going to be moving on and to another class, and we figured, well, we can still keep this going and build cars for people that want them. I mean, it was a huge demand for quite a few years. I mean, I remember people coming up to me and saying, "Oh, I got a K9 car, and hell, I can build a car for 10 years, and man, that thing can't be in very good shape." But he was proud as heck to have it.
They're probably still out there racing, But talk back in the day, you won. Craig instituted a rule where after you were in the top 5 in the Pro-Am division, you had to move up. When they started the Grand National Division, you got caught up in that deal. Once you moved up into the Grand National Division, was basically kind of a limited late model class. When you guys really said, well, I'm not going to have to race against my own cars anymore, that's when you got a little more into building the cars for customers and that. Talk about the transition from a Pro-Am street stock type car into a late model.
Well, the biggest difference, obviously, when you got in a wreck, you just couldn't go back to the bone pile and find an A-frame and this and that. A crash now would cost you $1,000 if you tore a right front wheel off. Where back in the Pro-Am days, we could put it on the frame machine, bend it back, put a control arm. It might cost you $100. Mm-hmm. So the money was probably the biggest change. But also, you could do so much more with the suspension. I remember, and this was after we'd been racing for a while, we started doing a few things that were maybe a little different than what most people did, but it worked for us. And I couldn't really tell you 100% why it was working, because there's a process that you do things and test to see if they work. Because if you change a bunch of stuff at once, what worked? Yeah. So you do a real thorough process when you make a change, and then you try to diagnose why it's working and doing different things. And to make a long story short, a friend of mine that he was in racing, and then he got hooked up with me, Mike Collins. He went to a racing school down in Florida, and I gave him a whole booklet full of notes to take, and I wanted him to ask these questions just, to see what their response was. Well, at the time, this is before the 4 bars and the rear end's going forward and giving you the bite and jacking it up, because we were doing stuff similar to that, but not with a 4-bar car. And this guy basically told Mike Collins that he was goofy and it would never work. Well, needless to say, Mike went back 2 years later, and this is when all this 4-bar stuff and the rear end moving forward and getting more bite. And then Mike asked the same questions again. So 2 years ago, you told me I was crazy and it would never work. And now you're all running it. So, and he told Mike, well, things change.
Yeah. Well, you're sitting down there just two mics down from you there. You two guys kind of shared the same car at different times during your career. We both drove the Ford Mustang for Tony Zager, powered by Ford. Of course, you drove it when it was 37. Howard drove it. Howard Kozel up to the microphone, drove it when it was number 77. Talk a little bit about that car and driving. That was in the sportsman division and up into the Grand National stuff.
Well, when the Kinney family had the car, it was number 37, and John here drove it at that time what was called as you said, the sportsman division. That was 1982. Then in 1983, Sunset changed their format a little bit. They went away from the 2,600-pound late models and the 3,000-pound sportsman and went to a kind of a combined. They combined the late models and the sportsman together, weighed 3,000 pounds with a two-barrel but with a quick change. I bought the car from the Kinney family that year. I believe John here was doing his time in boot camp in the service at that time. And quite honestly, quite frankly, I took a car that had a really good reputation and trashed the reputation in a very short amount of time. I didn't know what I was doing. I had never raced dirt before. I cut my teeth at Playland, and when it went away in 1977, I didn't race, but I really wanted to get back in, and I really wanted to do a Ford because I had success with a Ford at Playland. So John Kinney Sr. said that car could possibly be for sale, so I did what nobody's ever done in racing before, and that's borrowed money to buy it. And
no one ever does that.
No one ever spends money they don't have, except the U.S. government and racers. But be that as it may, we had a really difficult time with that car. We did okay with it the first year, but we were running a Ford 351 Cleveland with steel heads, and our nemesis was head gaskets. And when it did not overheat, I think we got a top 5 in the A feature, and that was a big deal to us. Well, then in 1984, Sunset went NASCAR. They went with the lighter tube frame cars. They went with the 390 carburetor. Well, all our old horse that we had was a pretty good two-barrel car, but it was no match for the late models in 1984 and 1985. So after 1985, I was fortunate enough to team up with Dan Mick from Lincoln. I had a pretty decent Cleveland with, at that time, new Ford SVO aluminum heads, and we took that out of the old Mustang, and we put that in Mick's car, and we raced together at Sunset for a lot of years.
For quite a number of years, still powered by Ford, still number 77. Talk about that night you picked up your first A-feature win out there in the late model division.
Well, if I may, I'd like to talk about a night that was 4 years before that. The only time we won at Sunset was in August of 1998, and I'm sitting here with people like this gentleman next to me. He won more A features than I can count, Dave Chase. To those guys, winning is always winning, and it's wonderful, but to guys like us who got in people like Dave Chase's way most of the time, to win in the late models at Sunset was a big deal. It was a huge deal to us. But I want to talk, if it's okay, real quick about a race in 1994. Our sponsor, Husker Glass, had made it possible for us that year to move up to a new chassis for the first time. I never had a new chassis before. We always ran other people's worn out stuff that we could scrape some money together or borrow some money to buy it. But that year we were able to get a new Rayburn chassis from Kosiski Racing. Kosiski's went into the racing business that year, or maybe a couple years before that. We were able to get this Rayburn chassis, and we had some good runs with it. But the Ford, we always could go pretty good in the heat races, or pretty good when there was something to get a hold of on the track. But when it got dry slick, we went backwards, and I saw the flag I learned to hate more than anything else, and that was that blue flag with the diagonal stripe. But this particular night we had pole. Car was running good. We were running the bottom, and there was just a little bit to get a hold of there. But the problem was every lap, the brake pedal, I don't know about these guys, but I always used the brake at Sunset, and every lap the brake pedal would get a little closer to the floor, a little closer to the floor, a little closer to the floor. And the closer to the floor the brake pedal got, the earlier I backed off in the corner. So I'm like, okay, I know we've run a lot of laps here. When are they going to start coming? When are they going to start coming? Well, Larry White, with 5 laps to go, Larry White would, if you were watching, he would hold out his hand stretched out like this, indicating to us that we're racing. There's 5 laps left to go. I'm like, wow, 5 laps left to go? Maybe I'll get a top 10 out of this. So pretty soon here comes this awesome looking black number 31, And Dave Chase got me with, I don't know, 4 laps to go. And Scott Koskovich got me on the last lap, and the brake pedal was right on the floor then. But to us, that 3rd place finish at Sunset with this group of competitors, that was a big deal to us. And I think you guys interviewed us on the front stretch, and as you're finding out right now, as it was then, it was a mistake to put me in front of a microphone. But that was a big deal to us. And Dave, I always felt like I didn't go around him and talk to him much because he was such in the top echelon of competitors. Why would he want to talk to a dog like me, you know? But Dave Chase was very, he was very complimentary to us, and it was just a pleasure. Even though we finished 3rd, that was as good as winning to us. And then in 1998, started outside pole, had a GRT chassis with a really good running Dan Mick Ford under the hood. It was one of those A features where it seemed like it took 16 laps to get a clean start. I'm like, oh, you know, my favorite spot to start any race is outside front row, and we had it. There was a little bit of stuff to get a hold of up there. Thought, hey, we could go in this race because the car was pretty good that night. And so we got going finally, but I noticed on the last 16th, 17th, 20th attempt to get a start, the car was really down on power. And I'm like, oh no. So I start watching my gauges. I'm not even watching the track. I'm looking at my gauges because we ran on a budget and we had 1 motor at that time, and there was no way I was going to lose that motor. So I figured the reason I led for so long, I wasn't looking at the track. I was looking at my gauges, but the car was just so down on power. But that played into our hands because it was dry slick. A couple times I didn't go in the corner hard enough for the car being down on power, and it pushed like a plow. And of course, when you're me, when you have the type of finishes that we had back then, your mind starts playing games with you. After you lead a lot of laps, you're like, did everybody quit and go home and I didn't know about it? What's going on here? Well, finally, before too long, we actually lapped a couple cars, and I'm like, what's up with this? So pretty soon, Larry holds out his 5 fingers. And this whole time I'm thinking, well, the engine's probably going to let go. Something's wrong. I wonder if I'll get a single-digit finish or a top 15 out of this. Well, now there's 5 laps to go, and we're still leading. And I'm like, even at that point, I'm like, well, maybe we could get a top 5 out of this. So we go a couple more laps. Larry holds out the 2. When he held out, 2 flags rolled up. That was the 2 laps left to go for us drivers. By this time, my heart starts pounding. I'm like, 2 laps left to go. We could get a top 3 out of this. So white flag comes out, and I must have pretty strong ribs because when that white flag came out and we were still leading, my heart about beat itself right out of my chest. And okay, get through turn 1. Don't screw up. Got through turn 1. Nobody's here yet. Get through the last corner and we might have this thing, and we did, and we won. But you know, this is not a racing fable, not an exaggerated story. That Ford engine broke a valve that night. We broke a valve at I-80 one time, and it trashed the entire engine. The piece of the valve that broke, this is honest to God's truth, the piece of the valve that broke pushed its way back up into one of the intake runners and sat there for the entire race, and we won that race on 7 cylinders. I thought a spark plug wire had come off or whatever, because our engine temperatures, pressures, everything held together. It was just unbelievable. It was our only win, and I can't tell you what it meant to us, and thanks for asking.
Wow.
Yep. So Dave, what did you think about
Oh, wait a minute. This is a guy that didn't want to come up here and say anything.
And now you know why. There's something about me in front of a microphone, so I apologize for the length of all
You're
that.
doing just fine.
So I know Tom wanted to ask John a question, but before he does, Dave, talk about, you know, Howard talked about some of the younger guys and moving up into that class after you've been up there and you're one of the guys up on top of the heap. What's it like to see guys like Howard Koziel, John Kinney get out there bumping heads with you, like you say, talking about being able to move around them in traffic, and how do you deal with something like that?
Well, I specifically remember that night that Howard won, and I was very proud of him. I know that he had wanted it very hard, and he just tried and tried and tried and had a little trouble, seemed like, every night. So, but it's great to see the guys that don't win on a regular basis win. I think it's great for the sport. You know, I remember Scott Koskovich's first feature win. I think everybody was so excited for him, and including us. And you know, the night Howard won, I think that everybody in the pits come over and patted him on the back, and it was well deserved.
Yeah, Howard's and Scott's both stick out in my mind as getting those first wins out there. You know, and John, you've been out of racing for quite a number of years. How hard was it? I know you had some family reasons and moving and stuff like that, taking over the family business. How hard was it to move away from racing after you've been involved with it that long?
Actually, not hard at all.
Oh.
But I guess the main reasons is I always told myself once my kids got old enough to be in sports and stuff that everything was going to be 100% towards sports. And between all four of my kids, we've played every sport there is to play, and it's just a deal that I love sports. You know, we did the go-karting thing with them and stuff, and it just didn't seem to be their thing. You know, my one daughter played football for 5-6 years. I mean, just a stud, you know, and I'm just excited to be involved in that stuff. And now they both play softball for Millard South. They're two-time state champions, all Nebraska state players, you know, and that's the stuff that drives me now, just like racing. But I can talk about that just as much as I can racing because that's what involves my life right now.
And one thing Tom mentioned, you know, and he wants to ask you about, you guys, one thing kind of everybody, John Kinney's trademark, Tom, what was that?
You guys lived right over the hill from Sunset Speedway. I mean, you could have drove the car there. And every night we're up on the high side there, you know, where the announcer's perch thing was, and you look back on 114th Street there.
Hot laps are over.
And hot laps are over.
Ready
and
for the
we're getting
national
ready to line up the heats, and you look behind the grandstand because you can look over and see the street behind you there, and here comes the K9 on the trailer through the pit gate. No hot laps, no nothing. Come out and win the whole deal. And it happened on more than one occasion.
So what were you guys doing all afternoon? It took you 5 minutes to get there when you left the driveway. Why did you always get there at 5 minutes to 7?
Well, like a great racer told me one time, Bob Kaziski, says the work's done in the garage and you just finish it at the track. So we just made sure things were really done at home. But no, that's just, but it's true. That is absolute truth. But there was two reasons. Back in the day, we used to have to pack the track a lot.
Ah.
And you'd get all that mud on your car. Next thing you know it, your car weighs 400 pounds more than it ought to. So if you're late, you don't pack the track.
That was one. But
that was one reason.
But that was one of the things that we talked about. A lot of the things that the Kelly family brought to Sunset Speedway into racing, the track packers.
That was a good thing.
That was a good thing.
But the second thing is obviously the less time you spend at the track, the less time they can look your car over and be mad at you.
Oh.
So this was all strategery. It wasn't, we left
it
late.
was purposely meant to be late all the time.
little known facts now that are coming out years after the fact.
We've been talking about all these great stories. I'm dying to hear this fire extinguisher story. Anybody else want to hear this thing?
That's what we're moving down to the end of the table.
You got that fire extinguisher?
It's right here.
I think we ought to pass it down and let Luke Cochran tell this story.
Well, I'm pretty sure I didn't do it.
Craig, where are you at?
You know,
Craig's hiding.
Craig would always kind of work pretty hard and always get really hot. And I always kind of thought that he'd cooled off a little bit.
You were doing him a favor, right?
Absolutely.
Do you remember the race and the reason why you decided to empty the fire extinguisher on Craig?
I'm pretty sure it wasn't deserved, but it was one of the...
I'd argue with that. It probably was.
There was a few times I was disqualified for actions detriment to racing, I think, or something such as that is what he kind of mentioned. But we got kicked out, and he was on the front straightaway directing.
That's because you were hanging with this guy. You're still racing the Gatra with this guy, Bill. We were talking about how many tracks Bill got kicked out of.
When I was a kid, we came to the races. I can remember getting in. You 5 and under got in for free, and when I was a kid, my heroes weren't Superman or Batman or anything else. It was race car drivers, many of which are sitting in this room, and Bob Kaczynski and Bill, and there's a guy named Russ Dilley that was pretty infamous, and I think he was the original Sunset Outlaw. I just got hung with the handle. But those were all my heroes, and so, I was two great fans, still am today, of Bill and Russ, so I didn't have much choice but to kind of follow in their footsteps. And Bill was very aggressive as a driver, and I get to race with him today in the Gatra series, and feel honored in fact.
And you guys put on some good races.
Yeah. I mean, Bill still wheels a car, and if you think the fire's out, it isn't. Yeah. And have a lot of fun.
Yep.
Luke, tell me your favorite memory from Sunset Speedway. Do you have just one?
Oh, I don't know if I have one in particular. Something Bill talked about earlier was when Bobby Allison was there and watching that race. I sat in the infield. That was probably one of the greatest experiences as a spectator I ever had. Was watching Al and Bill and I mean, Bobby Allison drove in the middle of the racetrack. I can't remember if Bill was on the high groove or the low groove, and Al was on the high groove or low groove, and those guys went around and around and around, 3 abreast, for so many laps. It's just it's amazing. And I remember Bill and Bobby Allison coming from the back, and it was just that was a pretty great experience. I enjoyed winning my first race there. I don't remember exactly when that was, but it was always I was always wanted to win, always wanted to go there, always wanted to be a racer, and it meant a lot to me. Racing still means a lot to me today, in the history of the racing, which is I'm happy to be here. But the fire extinguisher story, we were asked to not return for a couple of weeks, and and it was I don't think it was deserved. I don't think any of that was ever deserved, but that was then, this is now.
Well, it might not.
And Craig was just on the front straightaway, and it was a really hot day, and he just looked like he needed cooled off a little bit. And the funny thing of it is it was just water. Hell, you'd have thought it was battery acid or something like that, and the ramifications that came afterwards. But this fire extinguisher sitting down on the table is the actual fire extinguisher. I had 2 of them, and this one doesn't work as good as the other one, so it got used up, and I don't even think we had a compressor back then, so that one was set in charge, so that was the one that was utilized.
And you've had that decal to be Craigie's Cooler?
Yeah, Craigie's Cooler, and I think it only should take honorable place in his office, so he gets to look at it for the rest of his life.
Well, that's cool.
So I'm happy to present to Mr. Kelly the official fire extinguisher that.
Come on up, Craig.
I don't know if any of you ever seen The Wizard of Oz, but when they got rid of the Wicked Witch of the West, they put water on him, and that's all we did. I just wanted to see if it worked.
He's going the other direction now.
All right.
Oh, look at this! A Kodak moment.
Can we remember this moment for posterity? All right. It's good to see you two made up finally after all these years.
John, how about your most memorable sunset moment?
Oh, I got quite a few of them, but I got another one for Craig. This goes back before Craig was married.
Should we tell this in the sake of his?
Well, I never knew how Craig really was, but after a race one night, I got pulled off to the side and I got strip searched. And I, the officials come over and they have all the NASCAR, I can't remember what the upper level class was at the time. But they come over and says, John, you need to step out of your car. They didn't do this to nobody else. There was 6 of us in the tech line. And he says, John, you need to pull over here, and everybody else is going down there, So I get out of my car. Oh, okay. You know what? I thought somebody planted drugs on me or something. And they said, John, we need you to take your race suit off. I said, you got to be kidding me. Lucky I had my gym shorts on underneath my race suit that night.
Lucky for everyone else, too.
And basically, the way I understand it after the fact, but I don't know all the facts, just hearsay, that they were looking for nitrous. And it was just a deal that I've always asked for years and years and years. Has any other racer ever been strip searched by Craig Kelly?
You were that fast. You were just that fast. We only wanted you.
Had to be cheating.
Yeah, you never said, did they find anything?
They just copped a cheap feel.
Dave Chase, did you ever get anything like that? Any kind of weird questioning because of your speed?
No, I was a good boy.
Buddy, you were talking about how the man sitting next to you, John Kinney Jr., is probably one of your favorite drivers. Do you have a favorite story you can tell of him?
I remember in fact, John and I were just talking up here a little bit ago. My first memory of Sunset Speedway, there was 2 of them. And
How can you have 2 first memories?
Well, it was on the same night. First night I'd ever been to Sunset. I looked in the program, and there's a little cartoon. Craig always had these cartoons in the program. And I always dreamed of being a race car driver. And I seen this cartoon that said, this 25-cent bolt is what cost me the $10,000 race. And I thought that was a little bit of overdoing it. Boy, have I nowadays found out that's the truth. But I remember the first time I seen John here, it was the very first time ever in my life. Like I said, I was 9, 10 years old. I'd seen a father-son race, and to me that was magical. And so now I've gotten to know great guys like Scott and Nick Carlson. We have, Dennis Cook over here, Dirt Dynasty's Phil Robertson, if you want to call him that. Dennis Cook and his son Josh Cook. John and his dad, and this was really, really cool. And then as a little boy, John got to see me grow up right up through the high school years for the most part. My dad and him got to be good friends, and it was guys like this. There's a lot of talent in this room. I mean, there's no way I could ever put I could win all the championships in the world. There's no way I could ever be as good as what's sitting in this room right now. This is living history at its finest. There's so much knowledge to be learned here. If anybody walks out of this room thinking it's not an honor to be in this room, you're sadly mistaken. But it's guys like this that paved the way just as much as the guys out here in the crowd that opened the doors for me. And so, on behalf of me and my family, I want to say thank you for that.
So what was your first memory of John Kinney Jr. then?
He spanked the field.
Okay, there we go. Another one of them buddy stories. All right, should we take another break and then open it up to the fans?
Let's do it.
All right, we're going to take another quick break. We'll be right back here on the Front Stretch, presented by Joe's Karting on AM 590, Omaha's ESPN Radio.
Get ready for the victory lap as we make our way into Turn 4 on the Front Stretch, presented by Joe's Karting, online at joeskarting.com.
Welcome back to the Front Stretch, presented by Joe's Karting at Council Bluffs, online at joeskarting.com. We're wrapping up the 4th turn of the 2nd hour. It's the final time we're going to talk as a walk down Sunset Lane. Although I was talking to some people out in the crowd, I don't think it's too far-fetched. We need to do this again next year. What do you think, Joe? Do we need to do this again next year?
Absolutely. I think so.
I think we need to make this an annual event and just everybody get together and have a good time. Again, got to say thank you to everybody that made this happen. Quaker Steak and Lube, Joe's Karting, Kaziski Auto Parts, Wayne Q, Lee Ackerman, Chris Morris, Joe Kaziski, everybody that made this come together. If I forgot to thank you, please don't take offense. I'm a little scatterbrained. Craig, I got to thank you too, buddy. You've been great tonight.
It's been a great time.
And we appreciate your helping us out with this.
Hey, Dan, before you get too far,
yeah,
I'd like to bring up to everybody that's here tonight, Craig Kelly at Sunset Speedway brought up the Pro-Am division 30 years ago. So it's out its 30th year as being the Pro-Ams. And this year, the opening night on April 25th, I-80 Speedway is going to pay $1,030. I seen Bruce Ryman in the crowd. I'd like to see him somehow get back in a car. I seen the Sunset Outlaw was here. Stan, think of how many people get back in a Pro-Am.
I think John Kinney Jr. should come back in a Pro-Am.
Hey, it would
Kenny,
be the right
Cook,
year.
Purdue, Longmire. We need them all.
Yeah,
we need them all.
There's a bunch of them I've seen in here tonight. I'd love to see some of them guys come out in a couple Pro-Ams.
Mikey Wallace spent some time in a Pro-Am.
Get back in a Pro-Am tonight. You know, it'd be, hey, come on. It's going to be a great night. First night, April 25th, $1,030 to win, the 30-year anniversary for Pro-Am starting since Craig started them at Sunset.
And a great class you got started
Was that
there.
1,000 or 30 to win?
No, that was 1,030 for the 30 years.
All right, fans, here's your opportunity to ask questions to any one of these drivers up here. If it's a driver out in the crowd, we'll get them up here to answer your question. Now's your chance to come up and ask questions to some of these drivers. Maybe ask some stuff about Joe, pick his brain, even Craig Kelly and John Kinney, and maybe even Wayne Q. Wayne's got some stuff still dinging around up in there. Oh, Bud's got a question. You got a question, Bud?
Yeah, this was actually asked. This is for Joe Kaziski. Can you remember or give us stories as to just how sweaty was Dwayne Manchester after the races?
I really don't remember Dwayne that well, seriously. He was kind of a little time. He was a little, yeah. The school bus he drove in had to be hot and sweaty because it didn't have air conditioning, but I don't remember Dwayne that well. He was a little before my time.
All right,
and Dwayne didn't have any trailer ramps, so he had to pull his car up against the bank to unload it. That I remember.
The school bus.
That was good.
Joe, I got a question for you, though. Joe Proctor was here earlier tonight, and he said, ask Joe about the time he got fined and he paid in pennies.
I did?
Probably. You probably did.
If it was for Craig, I know I would have paid in pennies. I probably would have tried to figure out a way not to pay.
Was that the beginning of the Silver Dollar Nickels when you paid in that? When you pay the driver that wins the Silver Dollar Nationals, you pay him in silver dollars? Was that maybe the beginning to that?
You wish that was the reason.
That wasn't the reason.
It wasn't the reason. He was just being ornery.
You know, do you remember getting that? Was that you that fined him?
I'm sure it was.
I wish
it would have to be me. And I'm sure Scott was thrilled.
Oh, yeah. My wife would have been more thrilled. She
And
probably
Mona
pulled
was,
his headset.
Mona was thrilled as well. Where is the headset snapper?
They had a plan. She was going with some of her high school friends. They were going to eat tonight. They had this date scheduled before I realized this was going on.
I know she misses me.
Yeah.
Any fans out there got questions for these guys? Anybody got a question they want to ask? All right. Well, let's...
Wait. John Kinney Jr. has a question for...
Craig Kelly.
Uh-oh.
Oh, God.
What's the statutes of limitation of balloon launching?
What's the statute of limitation on balloon launching?
You're safe now. You're safe now.
What's the story behind that?
Why did you shoot balloons at me? I can't remember. Water balloons, not balloons.
For a few years, you blamed John Bob Wallace for throwing balloons up in the bleachers.
Oh, that's right. They used to throw the water balloons up in the bleachers, not at me.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Water balloons.
You could finally come clean that it was you.
Yeah, it was.
Well, I'm not
John
saying that. I
Kinney
need to know.
Jr.
I got to ask my attorney what the statutes of limitations are for.
Well, he's an attorney too. He might be able
Why did it?
Not his attorney.
Why did everybody have this thing about Craig and water? I don't know.
Yeah, everybody wanted to shoot me with something, didn't they?
Well, you know what they say, water and dirt makes mud.
Thank you very much.
Greg, I wanted to ask you some questions about, we've talked about the beginning of Sunset, you taking over it, the end of Sunset, the reason why it ended up closing up its doors at the end of 2000. Can you talk to the story about exactly how the end of it all came about?
Well, Omaha was surrounding Sunset, and we were having more noise and dirt complaints all the time. And I'd had friends in Chicago and Rockford, Illinois, that racetracks had been closed down by impending development, and the Arnold Palmer Deer Creek development came to us, and wanted to pay us to close down, and we had the opportunity to move to Nebraska Raceway Park, and the rest is history.
You guys accept. Was it a real tough decision, or was this something that I remember you and I had a pretty in-depth conversation about it? But was it a tough decision to end up deciding to close the track, or was it just it was time?
Well, it was time, but it was a heart-wrenching decision because myself and a lot of the people here tonight had grown up at the Speedway, and I hated to see it close. I knew it could never be replicated in another location that was farther away from the city, so it was a really, really difficult decision, but one that needed to be made and would have been made by government within a couple years anyway.
You use the word never could be replicated, and that reminds me of when we were talking about the actual design of the track and the banking. You talked about there was really 3 different types of grooves there. You had the low side that was flat, and then the banking in the middle, but then you also had like a shelf on top.
Well, the racers can probably talk about this better than me, but yeah, there was the bottom, and then there was the middle groove that was kind of the angled banking that the racetracks have nowadays, and then if you were really hooked up and there was good moisture, you could run up on the flat on the top. So it was a full 3-lane racetrack.
Joe, was there a bit of a shelf? Is that a good way to describe it, that the top of that track was kind of leveled off?
Oh, yeah, it was a shelf up there.
And was there a cushion up there, or was it just...
There was a cushion always up on the top side because the shelf was so flat, the cushion never peeled from it. So it would work until it hit to the next bank.
Yeah.
Which is really flat.
Yeah.
There was a really flat bank above that, yeah.
I got a question for Craig. What's the story between that picture with the rabbit ears? What's the story behind that?
The rabbit ears?
The picture with the rabbit ears?
My lovely wife, back in the mid-'80s, for my, what would that have been?
Birthday.
Probably I think my 40th birthday in 30th birthday in 91 had a Playboy bunny come and do my birthday presentation on the front straightaway, and it was very risque and very crude, and she's never forgot it to this day. And my mom hasn't let her forget it, I don't think. So thanks for bringing that up. That'll probably get me in trouble, Wayne. Thanks.
Don't forget, if any of you fans out there has got some questions for these guys, make sure to come up and ask away. We'd love to talk to you a little bit. Is there anything we have left to cover that we need to cover tonight?
Tom, what do you think?
I think we covered it. I don't know.
I think we've been here for quite a while. Let's wrap it up. We'll call it a night. We'll let everybody go and finish telling stories. I know that I'm going to be here for at least another couple hours. Chris, you don't mind staying open late tonight, do you, Chris? He says no. He'll stay open late for us. We're staying. We're continue drinking.
Well, we took it from Glenn Roby winning the first feature ever at Sunset Speedway to Joe Koziski winning the last feature ever at Sunset Speedway. What a great night.
6 feet apart.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Don't forget to listen to the entire replay. Sunday morning, the next 2 Sundays. This Sunday, we're going to play the Walk Down Sunset Lane, the early years. You can hear it on AM 590. And then next Sunday, we're going to play the later years, which is the latest hour you just heard from us. I want to say thank you to everybody who was involved in getting this going. Joe Koziski, Joe's Karting, Koziski Auto Parts, Quaker Steak and Lube, Lee Ackerman, Wayne Q. I can't say thank you enough to everybody who has been involved in this. It's been great, and thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. This has been The Front Stretch on AM 590.